This guy has the power to level an entire kingdom by himself. Right now, though, his own family calls him the family's disgrace. In the next few minutes, you're going to find out exactly why. The arena is packed. Every noble house within 3 days' ride sent someone to watch this match, because the girl standing in the center of the ring hasn't lost a single duel in 4 years. Her name is Freya Voss, and she's the kind of fighter who ends things before her opponent even finishes their opening stance. Red hair, red eyes when her bloodline aura flares, and a smile that says she already knows how this is going to go. Her opponent today is a nobody. Some minor noble's second son who got dragged into the qualifiers because his family needed the entry fee refunded. Freya doesn't even bother learning his name before the match starts. Why would she? Nobody remembers the names of people who last 11 seconds. Then the gate opens, and the nobody walks in with his hands in his pockets. Not, I forgot my weapon, hands in pockets. Not, I'm nervous, hands in pockets. The kind of hands in pockets that says this entire event is beneath him, and honestly, he's a little annoyed he had to show up. The crowd laughs. Freya doesn't. Something about the way he walks, completely relaxed, completely silent, makes the hair on the back of her neck stand up, and she can't explain why. She shakes it off. He's a low-class nobody. She's fought actual monsters. This is going to be fine. The horn sounds. Freya doesn't waste a second. She closes the gap in a blink, channels her bloodline aura into a crimson blade of pure force, and swings for his throat. He tilts his head 2 inches to the left. The blade passes so close it cuts a lock of his hair clean off, and the strand hits the ground before Freya even registers that she missed. She spins immediately, no hesitation, no ego bruised yet, just pure instinct. A follow-up strike aimed at his ribs. He steps back exactly as far as he needs to. Not an inch more. For the next 20 seconds, Freya Voss, undefeated for 4 years, daughter of a war hero, a girl who once put down a rampaging wyvern before her 16th birthday, throws everything she has at a boy who refuses to take his hands out of his pockets. She doesn't land a single hit. Somewhere in the crowd, an old knight leans forward in his seat, suddenly very, very interested. Freya finally stops, chest heaving, and for the first time in 4 years, there's something other than confidence on her face. Why? She breathes. Won't you fight back? The boy. Let's give him a name, because you're going to be hearing it a lot. Ezra Thorne finally speaks. His voice is quiet, almost bored, because you're not actually trying to win. You're trying to make sure this looks impressive. Those aren't the same thing. That's when Freya loses it. Real aura this time, not the showy kind. Her bloodline fully unlocks, red light pouring off her body like flame, cracking the stone floor beneath her feet. This is the technique she saves for tournament finals. This is the technique that ended a Duke's champion in 1 hit last season. She launches herself at Ezra with enough force to level a house. And Ezra finally takes his hands out of his pockets. We're going to come back to this moment. But first, you need 15 seconds of context, because what happens next only makes sense once you know what this nobody actually is. 6 years from now, or 6 years ago, depending on how you want to think about time travel, Ezra Thorne doesn't exist. Instead, there's something called the Hollow Reaper, 8 feet of animated armor and wrought black steel, commanding an army of the dead on behalf of a necromancer overlord named Mordrek Vane, the man who single-handedly ended 3 kingdoms and turned their populations into his personal army. Here's the thing about the Hollow Reaper, though. He didn't choose this. Ezra Thorne, the real Ezra, the human one, was a nobody from a minor barony who got caught in the crossfire of a war he had nothing to do with. Mordrek Vane's cultists captured him, broke his mind open with dark ritual magic, and rebuilt him into a weapon. For 6 years, the Hollow Reaper burned villages, crushed rebellions, and slaughtered entire garrisons without hesitation. Because the thing wearing Ezra's face wasn't making the decisions anymore. Somewhere underneath all that armor, the real Ezra was still in there. Awake, aware, screaming, silently, every single time. He watched himself do unspeakable things for 6 years and could not lift a single finger to stop it. The one thing Mordrek Vane never managed to erase, though, was the will underneath. And on the day Mordrek finally tried to fuse his own soul into the Hollow Reaper's body to make himself immortal, the day he got careless, the day he assumed 6 years of total control meant there was nothing left to fight, that buried will finally clawed its way back to the surface. The Hollow Reaper turned on his master mid-ritual. It wasn't clean. It wasn't heroic. It was two immortal adjacent monsters tearing an entire fortress apart around them, and by the time it ended, Mordrek Vane's personal guard, an assassin known only as Ravos the Silent, a man who could kill a knight with a single precise strike to 7 vital points, lay in pieces on the floor, and Mordrek himself was nothing but ash and a very confused, very final expression. Victory should have felt like something. It didn't, because by then, Ezra had already learned what the Hollow Reaper had done under Vane's control during those 6 lost years. The village his own family lived in, the soldiers who'd once been his childhood friends. His mother's face, the last time he'd seen it, right before the armor's fist came down. There was no revenge left to take. Mordrek was dead, Ravos was dead, and Ezra Thorne was still standing there in a body that had murdered everyone he'd ever loved, with absolutely nowhere left to put 6 years of grief. So he did the only thing that made sense to him at the time. He took off the helmet, knelt in the ashes of the fortress that had made him a monster, and ended it. He expected nothing after that. Silence, maybe. Or nothing at all, which honestly would have been a relief. Instead, he opened his eyes to sunlight, birdsong, and his sister's voice calling his name from across a garden that had been rubble for the last 6 years of his life. Ezra doesn't move for a solid 10 seconds. He's lying on his back in the grass, staring up at a sky that shouldn't exist, in a body that feels wrong. Small, weak, untrained. Every muscle in it has the raw, undisciplined feel of someone who's never actually been in a real fight. Then his sister's face appears above him, blocking out the sun, and every single thought in his head just stops. Ren Thorne is 19 here, younger than he remembers, softer around the eyes, alive in a way that makes his chest physically hurt to look at. She's laughing at him for falling asleep in the garden again, telling him their father is going to have his head if he's late for supper a second time this week. Ezra doesn't answer right away. He's too busy doing the math. If Ren looks like this, if the garden looks like this, untouched, no scorch marks, no bodies, then this isn't a dream. This is 6 years in the past, before the war, before the cult, before any of it. Somehow, by some mechanism he doesn't understand and honestly doesn't care to question right now, he's been given something he thought was mathematically impossible. A second chance. Ren, misreading his stunned silence as him being half asleep and possibly hungover, which, to be fair, given his reputation at this point in the timeline, is a completely reasonable assumption, offers to cover for him with their father one more time if he can just manage to look slightly less like a disaster at dinner. Our boy, because yes, we're bringing that energy back, he's earned it, has to physically stop himself from grabbing his sister and never letting go. Dinner does not go well. Or rather, it doesn't go well by the old standard, which is to say, Baron Archlich Thorne is once again standing at the head of the table, red in the face, explaining in extremely specific and creative language exactly how their household got banned from 3 separate taverns in a single month, and how exactly this reflects on House Thorne's already fragile standing among the Western baronies. This is apparently a running theme. The old Ezra, this timeline's version, before this exact moment, was something of a professional disappointment. Drinking, gambling, brawling, borrowing money he couldn't pay back. The kind of noble son whose name makes other nobles' eyes light up with barely concealed delight whenever it comes up in polite conversation. Ezra lets the lecture wash over him without a single word of protest, which is new. The old him would have had 6 excuses ready before his father even finished the first sentence. This Ezra just sits there and takes it, and something about his stillness makes his father actually stop mid-rant. Well, Archlich demands, nothing to say for yourself? No, Ezra says quietly. You're right. I embarrassed the family. That's on me. You could hear a pin drop. His younger brother Torin, 12 years old and buried in a book he's pretending to read, actually looks up in genuine shock. His mother, Lady Ilsa, sets down her fork. Even Ren, who's used to running interference for her brother, blinks like she misheard something. Baron Archlich stares at his son for a long moment, working his jaw like he's trying to figure out if this is some new kind of manipulation. You're agreeing with me? I am. You never agree with me? I know. Ezra says, and there's something in his voice now. Something old. Something tired in a way a boy his physical age has no business sounding. But I'd like to fix it. Whatever it takes. And after that, whatever punishment you think is fair, I'll take it without complaint. Nobody at that table has the slightest idea what to do with this information. Aldrich actually sits down, which is more alarming to the household staff than the shouting was. Here's a quick rundown of who's sitting at this table, because you're going to want to remember them. Baron Aldrich Thorne, gruff, proud, exhausted by a son who's spent years testing every last nerve he has. Lady Ilsa, sharp-eyed and quieter than her husband, the one who actually runs half the barony's affairs while everyone credits Aldrich. Wren, 22, the only person in this family who never gave up on Ezra even when he gave her every reason to. And Torrin, the baby of the family, quiet and bookish, who spent his whole life watching his older brother be a walking headache and quietly deciding he never wants to be anything like him. Ezra looks around this table, at people he watched die once already, in a life that technically hasn't happened yet, and makes a decision that's going to define everything that comes next. He is never letting that happen again, whatever it costs him. Later that night, alone in the training yard, Ezra picks up a branch off the ground, because his actual sword is still locked in the estate armory, apparently a punishment from 3 weeks ago that never got lifted, and faces down a boulder that's been sitting in the same spot since before he was born. He remembers the forms, 6 years of muscle memory from a body that isn't technically his anymore, but the movement patterns are still burned into whatever's left of his soul. He plants his feet, breathes out, and does something with that tree branch that a tree branch should not physically be capable of doing. The boulder splits clean in half. For a solid 5 seconds, Ezra just stands there, staring at the two halves of a rock that used to be one rock, and starts laughing in a way that's honestly a little unsettling if anyone had been around to see it. Not because it's funny, because it's confirmation. This isn't a dream. This isn't some dying hallucination playing tricks on him in his final seconds. He's actually here. He actually gets to try again. The laugh turns into something quieter pretty fast, the kind of laugh that cracks in the middle and turns into something else entirely, because the weight of 6 years of guilt doesn't just evaporate because you got a second chance. If anything, it gets heavier, because now there's pressure. Now there's a version of the future he knows is coming, and a family sitting in the house behind him who has no idea what's headed their way. Ezra sits down right there in the dirt, tree branch still in hand, and makes himself a promise. He's going to get strong again, faster than last time, smarter than last time, and when Mordrek Vane's people come looking for recruits again, because they will, they always do, this family isn't going to be an option on the table. He's going to make sure of it personally. Word travels fast in a small barony, and by the next morning, it's already reached Ezra that the tavern he apparently trashed a few weeks back, the one his father mentioned at dinner, has been telling anyone who'll listen that House Thorne's heir is a menace, who owes them for 3 broken tables and a small fortune in spilled ale. Old Ezra would have ignored it and let his father's coin purse handle the problem, like always. This Ezra decides he's going to walk down there personally and apologize. His loyal manservant, Wendell, a nervous, round-faced man who has clearly seen some things over the years working for this particular household, is not thrilled about this plan. He mentions, carefully, that there have been rumors the tavern's changed ownership recently. New management. The kind of new management that answers to people who aren't exactly known for polite conversation. Ezra just smiles and tells him it'll be fine. Wendell does not believe him. Wendell has been burned by that exact sentence before. But here's the thing neither Wendell nor anyone else in that barony knows yet. The thing you're about to find out in the next part of this story. That tavern isn't just under new management. It's a front for something much bigger. Something with ties that stretch all the way back to the exact organization that turned Ezra into a monster the first time around. And Ezra Thorne, quiet, apologetic, hands in pockets Ezra Thorne, is about to walk straight through their front door without the faintest idea of what he's actually stepping into. Which honestly might be exactly what they deserve. Last time, we left our boy Ezra walking straight toward a tavern that used to belong to a normal, boring innkeeper, and now belongs to something a lot less boring. He doesn't know that yet. He just knows he owes somebody an apology and a few broken tables worth of coin. Let's see how badly that goes. The rusted kettle sits on the edge of Landro's merchant quarter, tucked between a blacksmith and a shuttered bakery, looking about as unremarkable as a building can look. Which, if you know anything about how these things work, should already be your first red flag. The most dangerous places rarely look dangerous from the outside. Wendell trails a full 3 steps behind Ezra the entire walk over, muttering under his breath about how this is a terrible idea, how the young master has a habit of turning, "I'm just going to apologize," into "half the building is on fire," and how he personally would like to request hazard pay retroactive to the beginning of his employment. Ezra isn't listening. He's running calculations in his head, old habits from 6 years of tactical thinking as something that used to command armies. If his memory of this timeline's geography holds up, and if the criminal underworld here follows even remotely similar patterns to what he remembers from his old life, there's a real possibility this tavern isn't just a tavern anymore. He's about to find out he's right. 2 men are posted outside the door, arms crossed, doing a poor job of pretending to be regular patrons taking in some fresh air. The moment they spot Ezra approaching, their expressions shift from bored to something a lot more interested. "Well, look who decided to show his face again," one of them says, grinning in a way that has absolutely no warmth in it. Ezra keeps his tone level. "I'm here to apologize for the trouble I caused last time, and to settle whatever I owe." The 2 men exchange a look, the kind of look that says they weren't expecting this, and honestly, they were kind of hoping for a different outcome, one that involved a lot more violence and a lot less paperwork. Inside, the rusted kettle is louder and rougher than a normal tavern has any business being at this hour. A dozen or so patrons, if you can call them that, glance up as Ezra walks in with Wendell hovering nervously behind him. The bartender, a wiry man with more scars than sense, calls out toward the back room, and a moment later, a much bigger presence steps out to see what the commotion is about. His name, and you'll want to remember this one, is Dagran Thess. Built like a small mountain, missing half an ear, and carrying himself with the kind of easy confidence that only comes from years of being the most dangerous person in every room he walks into. He runs this particular branch of an organization that's been quietly buying up debt and property across 3 merchant districts for the better part of a year, and he does not appreciate surprise visits from noble brats who owe his crew money. "Thorn," Dagran says, cracking his neck, "didn't expect you to come back after last time. Thought we made ourselves pretty clear." Ezra keeps his hands loose at his sides. "I'm not here for trouble. I came to pay what I owe and apologize for the damage." There's a pause. Then Dagran laughs. A big, booming, genuinely delighted laugh, like he's just heard the funniest thing all week. A few of his men join in. "Apologize. You hear this? Lord Menace himself wants to apologize." Ezra waits it out. He's dealt with worse than mockery. He's dealt with things that would make Dagran Thess wet himself and run for the hills, honestly, but there's no reason to bring that up right now. Then one of the men near the bar, younger, cockier, clearly trying to make a name for himself in front of the boss, decides to push his luck. He makes a comment about Ezra's sister. Something crude, something that under any other circumstance Ezra might have let slide for the sake of keeping the peace, because he genuinely didn't come here looking for a fight. He's not going to let it slide today. What happens next takes about 4 seconds, and by the time it's over, nobody in that tavern is laughing anymore. Ezra doesn't draw a weapon. He doesn't have one on him, technically, since his sword is still locked in the estate armory. Instead, he closes the distance to the loudmouth near the bar so fast that half the room doesn't even register him moving until he's already there. One clean strike to the wrist, and the man's own dagger, the one he'd half drawn out of instinct, clatters to the floor before he even finishes registering the pain. Old Ezra, 6 years and 1 entire war ago, learned to disable an opponent using absolutely nothing. No weapon, no aura, just precise, brutal efficiency, honed over years of fighting things that would eat this entire tavern for a light snack. This body doesn't have anywhere near that level of raw power yet. But the technique, the muscle memory, the instinct for exactly where to hit and how hard, that's still there, buried under 6 years of undead army command experience that this world has genuinely never seen the likes of. Dagran's smile disappears. Fast. "Grab him," he snaps, and 3 more of his men step forward, weapons drawn now. What follows isn't pretty, and it isn't quick, because Ezra's current body genuinely can't do what his old one could. And there's a real, uncomfortable moment about halfway through where he takes a solid hit to the ribs that would have been laughably easy to dodge in his old life, and instead knocks the wind clean out of him. Wendell, watching from near the door, looks like he's about to have a heart attack, but Ezra gets back up, and that's when things start to shift, because even at a fraction of his old strength, even in a body that's untrained and unprepared, there's something underneath all of it that these men have genuinely never encountered before. A complete, total absence of fear. Ezra Thorn has looked into the literal face of a man who commanded armies of the dead and put an end to him personally. A handful of debt collectors with knives simply do not register as a threat in the same category. By the time the dust settles, 4 of Dagran's men are on the ground, and Dagran himself is staring at Ezra with an expression that's shifted somewhere between confusion and genuine calculating concern. "You're not the same idiot who trashed my tables a month ago," Dagran says slowly. "No," Ezra agrees, breathing a little harder than he'd like to admit. "I'm really not." Here's where things get more interesting than a simple bar fight. Because Dagran Thess, for all his muscle and menace, isn't actually the top of this particular food chain, and he's smart enough to know it. He orders his remaining men to stand down, wipes blood from a split lip, and studies Ezra with new eyes. "You know who you just embarrassed in front of half a dozen witnesses? This isn't some small operation, boy. You just made an enemy of the Black Talon." Ezra files that name away immediately, because something about it tugs at a memory that shouldn't exist yet in this timeline. A memory from years in the future, of an organization that supplied Mordrek Vane's cult with resources, recruits, and a steady stream of desperate people willing to look the other way for the right price. If this is the same organization at an earlier, smaller stage of its growth, that changes everything about what Ezra's actually walking into. He doesn't let any of that show on his face. "I'm not interested in your organization's business. I came to settle a debt. That's all this needs to be." Dagran studies him for a long moment, clearly weighing his options, and eventually decides that a noble house's heir showing up personally with this kind of unexpected combat ability isn't a problem worth escalating today. He names a figure, an inflated one, obviously, padded with damages that definitely didn't happen, and Ezra, recognizing a shakedown when he sees one, but also recognizing this isn't the hill to die on today, agrees to pay it. As he's leaving, though, Dagran calls out one more thing. "This isn't over, Thorn. You embarrassed us in front of our own men. Word's going to get back to people a lot less patient than me." Ezra pauses at the door, glancing back with an expression that makes even Dagran take an involuntary step backward. "Good," he says quietly. "I'd like to meet them." Wendell doesn't say a word for the first 10 minutes of the walk back to the estate, which is honestly a personal record for him. When he finally does speak, it's not to lecture Ezra about the danger of what just happened. It's a quieter, more careful question. "Young master, where did you learn to fight like that?" Ezra considers several answers, all of which involve explaining that he spent 6 years as an unwilling war criminal commanding the dead, which is not information he's remotely ready to share with anyone, let alone Wendell. Instead, he settles for something vague and mostly true. "I've been training. In private." It's a long story. Wendell doesn't push, but the look on his face says he's filing this away as one of several increasingly strange things about the young master lately, and he's not entirely sure what to do with the growing list. Internally, Ezra is doing his own filing. If the Black Talon organization exists this early, in this form, then Mordrek Vane's network, or whatever version of it exists in this timeline before it becomes what he remembers, might already be putting down roots. That's actually useful information. In his old life, he never got the chance to see this stage of things, because by the time the Hollow Reaper was aware enough to understand what was happening around him, the war machine was already fully built and rolling. This time, he's catching it at the foundation, and foundations, Ezra knows better than almost anyone alive, are a lot easier to burn down than finished buildings. Word of the tavern incident reaches Baron Aldrich before Ezra even makes it back to the estate. Small towns talk fast, and a noble's son beating up half a criminal syndicate's local muscle single-handedly is exactly the kind of story that travels at the speed of gossip. Ezra braces for another lecture. Instead, he finds his father standing in the study with an expression he genuinely doesn't remember ever seeing directed at him before. Something caught between confusion, concern, and a very small, very reluctant flicker of something that might, if you squinted, be pride. "They're saying you took down 4 of Dagran Thess's men without a weapon," Aldrich says slowly. "That true?" "It's true," Ezra confirms. His father is quiet for a long moment. Where in the world did that come from? Ezra thinks about 6 years of a life his father knows nothing about. An entire war fought and lost and somehow won again. A version of the future that's now been erased and rewritten, purely because he refused to let it stand. He thinks about how impossible it would sound if he said any of it out loud. "I've been training," he says again. The same half-truth from earlier. "I want to be someone this family can actually rely on. That starts now. Aldrich studies his son for a long moment, the same searching look he gave him at the dinner table the night before, and eventually just nods, slow and uncertain, like he's not entirely sure what to make of the person standing in front of him, but isn't ready to argue with results. Ren, who's been listening from the doorway, catches Ezra's eye over their father's shoulder and gives him the smallest, most genuine smile he's seen from her in this entire second life. It hits him harder than the fight did. That night, alone in his room, Ezra pulls out a scrap of parchment and starts sketching out everything he remembers about the Black Talon structure from his old life. The parts of it that overlapped with Mordrek Vane's supply lines, the names of a few key operators he remembers from years down the line, the rough layout of resources they'd need to build toward the kind of power that eventually helped end 3 kingdoms. If he can identify and dismantle even a piece of this organization now, at its early, weaker stage, it could set back Mordrek Vane's entire timeline by years, maybe long enough that the man never even gets the chance to build the cult that eventually captured Ezra in the first place. It's a long game. Longer than one tavern fight, longer than one apology, longer than rebuilding trust with a family who has no idea what he actually is or what he's trying to prevent. But for the first time and longer than he can honestly measure, Ezra Thorne feels something that isn't grief, and isn't guilt, and isn't the hollow numbness he carried around for 6 years wearing someone else's decisions like a second skin. He feels like he has a reason to keep going. Outside his window, unnoticed, a hooded figure watching from the tree line finally turns and disappears into the dark. Someone who was very interested in that tavern fight, and very interested in reporting exactly what they saw back to someone who's going to be a lot more important to this story very soon. Last time, our boy Ezra walked into a criminal front expecting a simple apology, and walked out having made an enemy of something called the Black Talon. And somebody was watching the whole thing from the tree line outside his estate that same night. Let's find out who. The hooded figure doesn't go far. A half-day's ride east, tucked into the hills above a half-abandoned quarry town, sits a building that used to be a monastery before its previous occupants mysteriously stopped occupying it. These days, it houses something else entirely. Inside, in a room lit by nothing but a single black candle that burns without ever getting shorter, a man sits with his back to the door, studying a map covered in small red pins. He doesn't turn around when the hooded figure enters and kneels. "Report," he says. His voice is unhurried, almost bored, the voice of someone who has learned patience is the only currency that actually matters in the long run. "The Thorn Boy," the figure says. He handled 4 of Dagran's men without a weapon. Clean technique, no wasted movement. Nothing like the drunk we've had reports on for the past year. Now the man turns. His face is unremarkable in almost every way. Middle-aged, plain features, the kind of face you'd forget within minutes of meeting him. Except for his eyes, which are an unsettling, flat black, like something's been scooped out from behind them and replaced with nothing at all. This is Castor Vel, and if you're paying attention, you should remember this name, because he's going to matter a lot more than a random Black Talon lieutenant should. "Interesting," Castor says, standing slowly. "Baron Thorne's son has been an embarrassment to that family for years. A drunk, a gambler, no talent whatsoever, by every account we've gathered." He walks to the map, taps one of the red pins near Landro, and now, overnight, he's fighting like a trained soldier. Could be a hired tutor, some traveling swordmaster the family brought in quietly. Could be, Castor agrees, though something in his tone says he doesn't believe it. Or it could be something more interesting. He's quiet for a moment, turning something over in his mind. Keep watching him. Don't engage. I want to understand what we're looking at before we decide whether he's a problem or an opportunity. The figure bows and disappears back into the dark, and Castor Vel returns to his map, studying the pin near Landro with a very particular kind of attention. The attention of a man who has learned, over a very long and very quiet career, that the most dangerous people in any story are rarely the ones who look dangerous at first glance. Back at the Thorne estate, Ezra has settled into something resembling a routine, and it is, by any reasonable standard, an absolutely brutal one. Every morning starts before sunrise with laps around the estate's outer wall, weighted with sandbags he made Wendell help him sew together out of old grain sacks. Wendell complained through the entire process and has continued complaining every morning since, though he's also started quietly leaving water out for Ezra during his runs, which Ezra notices and appreciates more than he says out loud. After that comes sword work, using an actual blade now that his father, cautiously, and only after a long conversation about responsible behavior, finally released it from the estate armory. Ezra's body is still catching up to 6 years of muscle memory that technically doesn't belong to it yet, and there's a real, humbling gap between what he knows he should be able to do and what this untrained, 17-year-old frame can currently manage. More than once, he pushes too hard and ends up flat on his back in the training yard dirt, staring up at the sky and reminding himself that rebuilding takes time, even when you already know the destination. But he's improving fast, faster than should be physically possible, honestly, though nobody around him has any frame of reference to know that. Torin, his younger brother, has started sneaking out to the training yard some mornings to watch, curled up on the fence with a book he's stopped pretending to read, clearly fascinated by the transformation happening in front of him. One morning, after Ezra finishes a sword form that ends with him embedding the blade a solid 2 inches into a wooden practice post, Torin finally works up the nerve to say something. "You used to make fun of me for reading about knights," the boy says quietly. "Said it was a waste of time. Now you're basically becoming one." Ezra pulls his sword free and looks at his little brother for a long moment. Really looks at him, the way you look at someone you watched grow into an adult in another life. An adult who Ezra remembers standing over a battlefield years from now, casualty counts still being tallied, telling everyone that his brother had died a hero, fighting off the undead horde that swept through their family's lands. That future isn't happening this time. Ezra's going to make sure of it. "I was wrong," Ezra says simply. "About a lot of things. I'm trying to fix that." Torin doesn't quite know what to do with an older brother who apologizes and means it, but he offers a small, uncertain smile anyway, and something about that exchange settles a little more of the weight sitting permanently on Ezra's chest. The Black Talon doesn't wait long to make their next move. 2 weeks after the tavern incident, a formal letter arrives at the Thorn estate, properly sealed, properly addressed. The kind of correspondence that looks completely legitimate on the surface. It's from a merchant house Ezra's never heard of, requesting a meeting to discuss an outstanding financial matter related to a previous transaction. Baron Archlich, going through the estate's correspondence, doesn't recognize it either and hands it off to Ezra with a raised eyebrow, since apparently his son now handles his own business affairs. Ezra reads it twice, and something about the phrasing, deliberately vague, deliberately official sounding, sets off every alarm bell his old life trained into him. This isn't a merchant house. This is the Black Talon, dressed up in a nicer coat, trying a more subtle approach after the tavern didn't go the way they planned. He decides to go anyway, because if Castervel's organization wants to talk instead of fight, that tells him something useful. It tells him they're not sure what they're dealing with yet, and uncertainty is exactly the kind of leverage he can work with. The meeting location is a private dining room above a respectable inn in the merchant quarter, several steps up from the rusted kettle in every visible way. Ezra arrives with Wendell trailing behind, and finds a single man waiting at the table. Not Dagran this time, not muscle. Someone smaller, sharper dressed, with the careful posture of a person used to negotiating rather than fighting. "Lord Thorn," the man says, gesturing to the empty seat across from him. "Thank you for coming. My name is Corin. I represent certain business interests you've recently interacted with." Ezra sits, keeping Wendell standing just behind his shoulder. "You mean the people whose men I put on the ground 2 weeks ago?" Corin's smile doesn't waver. "Precisely those people, yes. Though I should mention, my employer found the encounter fascinating rather than upsetting. He's not interested in retaliation, Lord Thorn. He's interested in understanding you better." This is new. Ezra keeps his expression neutral, though internally he's recalculating fast. This isn't the approach of an organization looking for revenge. This is the approach of an organization trying to recruit or assess a potential asset, and that's a much more dangerous conversation to be having. "I'm not interested in whatever your employer is offering," Ezra says. "You haven't heard the offer yet." "I don't need to." Ezra leans forward slightly. "Tell your employer I know exactly what kind of organization the Black Talon is. I know what it does under the surface, and I know where it's headed if it's allowed to keep growing." He can consider this conversation his one and only warning. For the first time, something flickers behind Corin's carefully composed expression. Genuine surprise, maybe even a flash of concern. He hadn't expected a 17-year-old noble's son to speak with this kind of specific, confident knowledge about an organization that's supposed to be operating entirely in the shadows. That's a bold claim, Lord Thorn. It's not a claim, it's a fact. Ezra stands, done with the conversation. Tell Castor that whatever plans he's building toward, I know how the story ends if nobody stops him, and I'm planning to stop him. Saying the name out loud is a calculated risk. Ezra doesn't actually know for certain that Castor is running this branch of the operation yet, only that the name surfaces in his memories of the organization's later, larger structure. But watching Corin's face go carefully, deliberately blank at the mention of it, tells him everything he needs to know. He got it right. Back at the converted monastery, Corin delivers his report with visible unease, and Castor listens to the entire thing without a single change in expression, which, if you've spent any time around Castor, is somehow more unsettling than if he'd reacted with anger. He said my name, Castor says slowly, once Corin finishes. Yes, my lord. A name that exists in exactly 4 ledgers in this entire organization, none of which that boy should have any access to. Castor walks slowly to the window, looking out over the quarry town below. Either someone in my organization has a very serious loyalty problem, or that boy knows something about me that he genuinely shouldn't know. He's quiet for a long moment, turning the problem over with the same patient, methodical attention he applies to everything. Increase surveillance, he finally says. I want a full accounting of everyone Ezra Thorne has spoken with in the last month. Every tutor, every visitor, every letter that's come in or out of that estate. If someone taught him what he knows, I want to know who. And if nobody taught him, if he genuinely knows on his own? Castor's expression, for just a moment, shifts into something colder. Then he's either far more dangerous than a 17-year-old noble's son has any right to be, or he's exactly the kind of asset worth acquiring by any means necessary. He turns back to Corin. Either way, I want him watched. Closely. And I want to know if he has any weaknesses we can leverage. The word weaknesses hangs in the air with a very specific, very deliberate weight. Corin, who has worked for Castor long enough to understand exactly what that word can mean in practice, bows and leaves without asking any follow-up questions he doesn't actually want answered. 3 days later, Ezra is out training alone in the eastern fields, well beyond the estate walls, when he feels something he hasn't felt since his old life, a presence deliberately masking itself, moving with the kind of careful, controlled stealth that only comes from serious training. He doesn't let on that he's noticed. He continues his sword forms, letting his awareness spread outward the way he learned to do commanding scouts across a battlefield years from now, tracking the presence as it circles, testing his guard, looking for an opening. When the attack comes, it's fast, genuinely fast, faster than anything Ezra's faced since waking up in this new timeline. A figure drops from the tree line, blade already swinging, aiming for a strike that would have ended the fight in a single move against anyone less prepared. Ezra's own blade comes up just in time, catching the strike at an angle that sends a shock of pain up his arm from the sheer force behind it. His attacker, cloaked, face hidden, moving with the precise, economical style of a trained assassin, doesn't pause to gloat or explain themselves. They press the advantage immediately, chaining strike after strike with brutal, professional efficiency. This is not one of Dagrun's untrained thugs. This is someone genuinely skilled, sent by someone who's decided that watching Ezra Thorne isn't enough anymore. Someone's decided he needs to be eliminated before he becomes a bigger problem. For the first real time since his return, Ezra's untrained body genuinely struggles to keep up with what his mind knows he needs to do. He takes a shallow cut across his forearm, another across his ribs, each one a painful reminder of exactly how far he still has to go before this body matches what he used to be capable of. But he's not the same person who died the first time either. He spent years, even if this world hasn't seen it yet, learning to fight while completely outmatched, learning to find the smallest opening and turn it into an opportunity. And this assassin, skilled as they are, has one critical weakness Ezra recognizes almost immediately. They're not fighting to win a duel. They're fighting to kill quickly and disappear, which means every one of their strikes carries a tiny window of overextension built into it. A split second of vulnerability they're relying on their opponent never being fast enough to exploit. Ezra is fast enough. On the assassin's next strike, instead of blocking, he sidesteps at exactly the right angle, letting the blade pass a hair's width from his side, and drives his own sword forward in the gap the overextension creates. It's not a killing blow, his current strength isn't there yet, but it's enough. The assassin staggers back, a deep gash across their side, their masked breathing suddenly ragged. Tell whoever sent you, Ezra says, breathing hard, blood dripping from his own wounds, that I already warned them once. This was the last polite conversation they're getting. The assassin doesn't respond. They simply retreat into the tree line and vanish, moving with the kind of speed that confirms exactly how serious a threat they were, and exactly how lucky Ezra is that this particular fight didn't go the other way. Wendell finds him 20 minutes later, still catching his breath in the field, blood soaking through his shirt in 2 places, and very nearly faints on the spot. "Young master, what in the world?" "I'm fine," Ezra says, which is a lie, but a manageable one. "Help me get cleaned up before anyone else sees this." Wendell, to his credit, doesn't argue, just helps him back toward the estate, muttering the entire way about how he genuinely cannot keep doing this, how his heart cannot survive whatever the young master has apparently gotten himself involved in, how he's seriously considering asking for hazard pay in writing this time. That night, alone in his room, wounds cleaned and bandaged, Ezra stares up at the ceiling and thinks about how close that fight actually was. Not because the assassin was unbeatable, he wasn't, not really, not against someone with Ezra's experience even trapped in an untrained body, but because it confirms something important. Castor Vel isn't just watching anymore. He's decided Ezra is enough of a threat to warrant killing, which means the timeline Ezra remembers, where the Black Talon slowly, quietly builds itself into the backbone of Mordrek Vane's eventual war machine, might already be shifting, just from the ripples of his own choices. That's both good news and terrifying news in roughly equal measure. Good, because it means he's actually changing something. Terrifying, because it means he no longer has the comfort of knowing exactly what happens next. He's off the map now, truly off it, for the first time since he woke up in that garden. Somewhere out there, Castor Vel is recalculating too, trying to figure out exactly what kind of monster he's accidentally provoked. And somewhere further out, much further, in a place neither of them can see yet, something much older and much more dangerous than either of them has just quietly, almost imperceptibly, taken notice of the fact that a piece on the board just moved somewhere it was never supposed to move. But that's a story for later. For now, Ezra Thorne closes his eyes, lets the exhaustion finally catch up with him, and allows himself exactly one small, tired smile before sleep takes him. He's still standing, his family is still safe, and for the first time since this entire second chance began, he's stopped being the one reacting to the story around him. He started writing it. Last time, an assassin came for Ezra in broad daylight and barely walked away with their life. Castor Vel has officially decided our boy is a threat worth eliminating. Problem is, Castor has no idea just how badly that decision is about to backfire. News of an attack on House Thorne's heir, even one that got covered up as best as Wendell and Ezra could manage, doesn't stay quiet for long in a barony this size. Within a week, whispers reach Baron Aldrich's ears through the household staff, and this time there's no lying his way out of it. Aldrich corners Ezra in the study, door closed, voice low and dangerously controlled in a way that's somehow worse than his usual shouting. "Someone attacked you, on our own land, and you didn't think that was worth mentioning to your father?" Ezra considers his options. He could keep lying, keep this contained the way he's kept everything contained since waking up in this timeline. 6 years of habit, of processing every threat alone because there was never anyone else who could help carry it. But looking at his father's face, genuinely afraid for the first time Ezra can remember, something in him decides that's not the right call anymore. "There's an organization operating out of Landro," Ezra says carefully, choosing his words like he's diffusing something. "Calling themselves the Black Talon. I ran into some of their people a few weeks back at a tavern. Things escalated. They sent someone to finish it quietly." Aldrich's expression darkens with every word. "And you're only telling me this now? I didn't want to put the family in more danger than I already have. You're my son," Aldrich says, and there's something raw underneath the anger now. Something that sounds almost like it's been building for years, and finally has somewhere to go. "Whatever mess you've stepped in, whatever's changed about you these past weeks, you don't have to carry it alone. That's not how this family works. That's not how it's ever worked, even when you didn't seem to want any part of it." Ezra doesn't have a ready response to that. In his old life, in 6 years of commanding an undead army under someone else's will, the concept of family had become something abstract, a memory he wasn't even allowed to grieve properly, buried under layers of control he couldn't break free of until it was far too late to matter. Hearing his father say something like this, meaning every word of it, hits somewhere he genuinely wasn't braced for. "I know," he finally says, quieter than before. I'm still figuring out how to let people help. Aldrich studies him for a long moment, and something in his expression softens, just slightly. Well, start figuring it out faster, because I'm not sitting on the sidelines while some criminal organization sends killers after my family. He straightens, businesslike again, already moving into problem-solving mode. I'm sending word to the regional garrison commander. If this Black Talon is operating in Landro, that's exactly the kind of thing the Crown's forces should be handling. Ezra hesitates. Part of him, the strategic, 6 years of warfare part, immediately starts calculating whether involving the Crown's garrison helps or complicates things. If Castorville's organization has infiltrators anywhere near local law enforcement, which, given what Ezra remembers of how these things tend to grow, is a real possibility, then alerting the garrison could just as easily tip off Castor as it could actually threaten him. But he also recognizes something important in this moment. His father is trying, genuinely trying, to be part of the solution instead of being protected from the problem. And after everything Ezra remembers losing the first time around, he's not about to shut that door now, even if it complicates his plans. Send word, Ezra says, but let me handle the direct threat myself. If the Black Talon has people inside the garrison, moving too loudly could put more of us at risk. Aldrich doesn't love that answer, but after a long moment he nods. Fine, but you keep me informed from now on, all of it. No more handling things alone. It's not a perfect compromise, but it's a start, and honestly, that's more than Ezra expected to get. Back at the converted monastery, Castorville is dealing with a problem of his own, and it's making him increasingly, uncharacteristically irritable. The assassin who attacked Ezra, a man named Farron, one of Castor's most reliable operatives, someone who's completed over 30 contracts without a single failure, has returned with a wound that shouldn't have been possible against an untrained noble's son. Explain it to me again, Castor says, pacing slowly in front of the black candle that never seems to burn down. You had every advantage, surprise, superior technique, years of training against someone who, by every account we've gathered, has been fighting for barely a month. Farron, pale from blood loss and still recovering, doesn't have a satisfying answer. He read my strikes before I finished them. Every overextension, every opening I created, he found it instantly. Like he already knew exactly what I was going to do before I did it. Castor stops pacing. That specific detail catches his attention in a way the rest of the report didn't. Predictive combat awareness, Castor says slowly, half to himself. That's not something you develop in a month of amateur training. That's something you develop over years of fighting people who are actively trying to kill you. Real combat, not sparring, not tournaments. He turns back to Farron, which means either that boy has been living a very different life than his family's estate suggests, or he trails off, considering a possibility he'd initially dismissed as too unlikely to be worth serious consideration. But now, with this new information, it starts to fit uncomfortably well. Or he's not who he appears to be at all, Castor finishes quietly. There are stories, old ones, the kind whispered among people who work in the darker corners of the world Castor operates in, about souls that don't stay where they're put, about people who die and come back changed, carrying knowledge and skill from lives that technically haven't happened yet in the world they've returned to. Castor has always treated these stories as exactly that. Stories, superstition, the kind of thing desperate people tell themselves to explain away things that don't have simple explanations. But he's also spent his career learning that the most dangerous truths often hide behind the stories people dismiss as impossible. I want everything we have on Ezra Thorne before this past 2 months, Castor says. Every record, every account from anyone who's known him his whole life. I want to understand exactly how much this boy has changed and how fast. Baron Aldrich's letter to the regional garrison commander doesn't go unanswered for long. Within a week, a small contingent arrives at the Thorne estate to investigate, and leading them is someone who's about to become considerably more important to this story than a routine garrison visit would suggest. Her name is Captain Sarah Voss, yes, related to Freya Voss from the opening tournament, in case you were wondering how these threads connect, because we're circling back to that eventually. And she carries herself with the kind of quiet, battle-tested competence that immediately tells Ezra she's not someone to underestimate. She's mid-30s, scarred along one forearm from what looks like an old burn injury, and has the particular sharp, assessing gaze of someone who's spent years learning to read people faster than they can lie to her. Baron Thorne, she says, dismounting in the estate courtyard. I understand there's been an attempted assassination on your son. I'll need to speak with him directly. Ezra meets with her in the study, and within the first few minutes of conversation, he realizes she's considerably sharper than he initially gave her credit for. She asks precise, pointed questions, not the generic ones a routine investigation would follow, but the kind that suggests she's already done some homework on the Black Talon before ever arriving here. You said the organization calls itself the Black Talon, Sarah says, studying him carefully. That's not a name that's supposed to be public knowledge. We've had it under quiet investigation for the better part of a year and managed to keep it contained to internal garrison reports. How exactly did a 17-year-old noble's son learn that name? Ezra weighs his options fast. Lying to her feels like a mistake. She's clearly good enough at her job to catch inconsistencies eventually, and burning trust with someone who might genuinely be a useful ally isn't a smart long-term play. I have sources, Ezra says carefully. Sources I'm not able to fully explain right now. But I know more about this organization's structure and its eventual scope than you'd expect from anyone outside it. I know it's bigger than a local criminal outfit. I know it's building towards something, and I know the man running this particular branch, Castor Vel, is not someone who's going to stop just because a garrison patrol shows up asking questions. Sarah's expression shifts, something calculating settling behind her eyes. That's a very specific claim to make about a name you supposedly stumbled onto by accident. I didn't stumble onto it, Ezra admits. I went looking for it, because I know where this organization is headed if nobody stops it early, and I'm trying to make sure that future doesn't happen. It's about as much truth as he's willing to risk sharing with someone he's known for exactly 10 minutes. Sarah studies him for a long, uncomfortable moment, clearly turning over several possible interpretations of what he's just told her. Spy, informant, something stranger, before eventually deciding, for now, to let the ambiguity stand. All right, she finally says. I don't know what you are, Lord Thorne, or how you know what you know, but if even half of what you're implying is accurate, this is bigger than a routine investigation, and I'd rather have someone with inside knowledge working with us than working around us. She extends a hand. Consider this an alliance for now. Cross me, and it ends immediately. Ezra shakes her hand. It's not the outcome he expected walking into this conversation, but it's a considerably better one than he'd hoped for. 2 weeks later, working together, Sarah's garrison intelligence combined with Ezra's uncomfortably accurate predictions about Black Talon operational patterns, they managed to identify and raid a smaller Black Talon safehouse on the outskirts of Landro, the kind of minor logistics hub that, in Ezra's old timeline, would have gone completely undetected for years, while it quietly funneled resources toward the organization's eventual transformation into something far more dangerous. The raid itself is fast and mostly bloodless, thanks to good intelligence and better timing. They catch the safehouse's small garrison of Black Talon operatives completely off guard, and within the hour, Sarah's people have secured the location and started going through documentation that's going to prove invaluable in the weeks ahead. Ezra, moving through the captured ledgers with the kind of careful attention that comes from actually knowing what to look for, finds something that makes his blood run cold. A supply manifest. Weapons, yes, and coin, the usual criminal organization staples. But buried further down the list, reagents. Specific ones. The kind used in exactly one type of ritual work, the kind Ezra remembers all too intimately from 6 years of watching Mordrek Vane's cult operate. Necromantic ritual components. Here. Already. Years earlier than Ezra ever encountered them in his old timeline. This is bigger than a criminal syndicate, Ezra says quietly, showing the manifest to Sarah. This is the early groundwork for something a lot darker than smuggling and extortion. Sarah studies the manifest, her expression darkening. Ritual magic. Forbidden practices, if I'm reading this correctly. She looks up at Ezra. You said you know where this organization is headed. Is this it? Is this the endpoint you're trying to prevent? Ezra thinks about 6 years of undead armies. About a man named Mordrek Vane who ended 3 kingdoms and built himself into something close to unstoppable. About a version of himself that spent those same 6 years as an unwilling weapon in that man's hands. This is the beginning of it, he says. If we don't stop it here, at the root, it's going to grow into something that makes today's raid look like nothing. That night, back at the estate, Ezra finally sits down and writes everything out. Not for anyone else to read, just for himself. a way of organizing 6 years of half-buried memory into something he can actually work with strategically. Mordrek Vane doesn't exist yet, not as the war-ending monster Ezra remembers. Right now, if the timeline holds any resemblance to what Ezra knew, he's likely still young himself, still building the foundational pieces of whatever eventually becomes his cult, probably not even aware yet of the full scope of what he's capable of building. Castor Vel, running this particular branch of the Black Talon, might be an early recruiter, a talent scout of sorts, someone whose job is to identify and gather resources, people, materials, funding, that eventually flow toward Mordrek's growing organization. If Ezra can cut this connection now, before Mordrek Vane ever rises to the kind of power that made him unstoppable in Ezra's old life, the entire war that consumed 6 years and countless lives might never happen at all. It's an enormous, almost impossibly optimistic goal for a 17-year-old noble's son, with an untrained body and a garrison captain ally he's known for less than a month. But Ezra Thorne has already died once fighting a war he never chose. He's not interested in dying, or living, through a version of that same war a second time, not when he's been given the almost impossible gift of catching it before it ever fully begins. He looks out his window at the dark barony spread below him, his family's land, his family's people, all of it currently safe, all of it currently unaware of exactly how close it came to a very different future. Not this time, he says quietly, to nobody in particular. I'm not letting it happen again. Somewhere out there, Castor Vel has just received a very concerning report. His safe house compromised, his supply manifest captured, and worse, a growing certainty that the Thorn Boy isn't just lucky or well-trained. He's starting to suspect something much stranger, and he's about to do something about it that's going to force Ezra into a confrontation neither of them are fully ready for. Meanwhile, back at that tournament arena from the very beginning of this story, the one with Freya Voss, the undefeated fighter Ezra effortlessly outmaneuvered without taking his hands out of his pockets, word has started spreading about a mysterious noble's son who fights like nothing anyone's ever seen. And word, as it turns out, has a funny way of reaching exactly the people you'd least want it reaching. Last time, Ezra and Captain Sarah Voss raided a Black Talon safe house and found proof that this criminal organization is actually the early groundwork for something much darker. Necromantic ritual work. The exact same foundation Ezra remembers becoming a war that consumed 6 years of his old life. Castor Vel knows he's losing control of the situation, and somewhere, word about a mysterious noble fighter has started to travel. Let's finish this. Castor Vel does not handle losing gracefully. That's not a character flaw so much as a fundamental incompatibility. Everything about his position within the Black Talon has been built on a foundation of always being 3 steps ahead, always controlling the narrative before anyone else even realizes there's a narrative to control. The safe house raid, the captured manifest, the growing partnership between the Thorn Boy and a garrison captain who's suddenly asking uncomfortably specific questions, none of it fits the pattern he's used to managing. Standing in front of his black candle that never burns down, he makes a decision that, in hindsight, is going to be the single biggest mistake of his career. He decides to go after the family directly, not Ezra. Ezra's proven too dangerous, too unpredictable, too well guarded now with a garrison captain actively watching his back. But a family has more than one vulnerable point, and Castor has spent enough time gathering intelligence on House Thorn to know exactly where the softest one sits. Ren Thorn rides out most mornings, alone, along the eastern trail that borders the estate's furthest fields, a habit of hers going back years, one of the only pieces of freedom she carves out for herself in a life otherwise dictated by her family's social obligations. It's a detail Castor's surveillance picked up weeks ago and filed away, back when the plan had simply been to understand the family better. Now it becomes something else entirely. If the boy has some unnatural advantage protecting him, Castor tells Corin, voice flat and businesslike in a way that makes the words somehow more chilling, then we stop protecting him from the consequences of interfering with us. We show him exactly what it costs. Ren doesn't see it coming. Why would she? The Eastern Trail has been safe for as long as she can remember, quiet and familiar. The one place in her structured life where nobody's watching her every move or judging her every choice. 3 riders intercept her a mile out from the estate, moving with the kind of practiced coordination that tells her instantly, this isn't a random encounter. She doesn't even manage a scream before a hand closes over her mouth and she's pulled from her saddle. By the time anyone at the estate realizes something's wrong, her horse returning riderless a full hour later, saddle still fastened, no sign of its rider. The trail is long since gone cold, and a message has already been left in its place. Pinned to a tree near where her horse was found, a simple note, unsigned, giving a location and a time and nothing else. Ezra reads it once and feels something in his chest go completely, dangerously cold. He's felt this exact sensation before. 6 years ago, or 6 years from now depending on how you count it, standing over the ruins of a village that used to be his home, understanding with total, final clarity exactly what he'd lost and exactly whose fault it was. He is not going to feel that a second time. Not while there's still a version of this story where he can stop it. Baron Archlich wants to send the entire household guard. Captain Sarah, arriving within the hour once word reaches the garrison, wants to mobilize a proper tactical response, careful and methodical, minimizing risk to the hostage. Ezra listens to both of them, understands both of their instincts completely, and quietly decides neither approach is going to work. If we send an army, he says, Castor kills her the second he sees us coming. That's not paranoia. That's exactly how someone like him thinks. He needs leverage more than he needs to prove a point, and the moment that leverage stops being useful to him, it becomes a liability he'll dispose of without hesitation. Then what do you suggest? Sarah asks, though something in her tone says she already suspects the answer and isn't going to like it. I go alone. The room erupts predictably, his father shouting that he's not sending his son into a trap by himself, Sarah arguing tactically that no single fighter, however skilled, should walk into an unknown hostile location without backup. Ezra lets the arguments run their course for a moment, before cutting through them with something that isn't quite raised voice, but carries a weight that makes everyone stop anyway. You've seen what I can do, he says, looking directly at his father. You don't fully understand it, and I know that scares you, but I need you to trust me on this one thing. Castor Vel has no idea what he actually took a hostage from. He thinks he's dealing with a talented noble's son. He's about to learn exactly how wrong he is. Something in his voice, steady, certain, carrying an edge of controlled fury that's been building since he first read that note, finally gets through. Archlich doesn't agree easily, and Sarah insists on at least positioning her garrison forces at a discreet perimeter in case things go badly. But in the end, both of them step back and let Ezra do what he's decided he needs to do. The location on the note is an abandoned watchtower a few miles outside Landro, the kind of crumbling stonework that used to serve some long-forgotten border purpose and now just sits quietly decaying, forgotten by everyone except people who need somewhere private to do things they'd rather no one witness. Ezra arrives at the appointed time, alone, unarmed by any obvious weapon, his sword left behind deliberately, a calculated choice, because he wants Castor Vel to feel confident, to feel like he's holding every advantage right up until the exact moment that confidence gets shattered. Castor is waiting at the base of the tower, flanked by 6 armed operatives, with Ren bound and gagged a few feet behind him, frightened but, Ezra notes with relief that nearly buckles his knees, unharmed. Lord Thorn, Castor says, that same unhurried, patient tone from every previous encounter Ezra's heard about secondhand. I have to admit, I expected more resistance getting you here. This was almost disappointingly easy. You have my sister, Ezra says. Let her go, and we can discuss whatever it is you actually want. What I want, Castor says, circling slowly, studying Ezra with the kind of clinical attention a collector gives to a rare specimen, is to understand exactly what you are. Because everything about you contradicts everything my organization's intelligence gathered on you for years before this. A drunk, a failure, a disappointment to his family in every measurable way. And now, suddenly, you're fighting like a war veteran, speaking with knowledge you shouldn't possess, and dismantling operations that have taken my organization years to build. He stops directly in front of Ezra, close enough that his next words come out almost conversational in their quiet intensity. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly what you are and how you know what you know. And depending on how satisfying I find that answer, I might even let your sister walk away from this. Ezra looks past Castor, meets Ren's terrified eyes for just a moment, and feels something inside him settle into a place he recognizes from 6 years of command decisions made under impossible pressure. Calm, focused, completely, dangerously certain. You want to know what I am? Ezra says quietly. I do. All right. Something shifts in Ezra's posture. subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone without serious combat experience. But every one of Castor's 6 armed operatives instinctively tenses in response. Some deep animal instinct recognizing danger a half-second before their conscious minds catch up. I'm the reason the man you're building toward, Mordrek Vane, or whoever eventually takes his place, never gets to finish what he starts. Castor's carefully composed expression finally, genuinely cracks. How do you know that name? Because in another life, Ezra says, and his voice drops into something colder, older, carrying 6 years of buried grief finally given somewhere productive to go. I watched him build an army out of the dead. I watched him turn me into a weapon and use me to end 3 kingdoms. And I watched myself, trapped inside my own body, unable to stop any of it, while everyone I ever loved died because of choices I never got to make. End hint 17. The temperature around the watchtower seems to drop several degrees, though nothing physical has actually changed. It's something in the air. Something in the way Ezra's presence has shifted from dangerous young fighter into something considerably harder to define, and considerably more unsettling to stand near. I got a second chance, Ezra continues, and I am not wasting it explaining myself to a middle manager for a war criminal who hasn't even fully become one yet. Castor, to his credit, doesn't hesitate long. Whatever internal debate he's having about the impossible things Ezra just told him, he's professional enough to recognize an immediate physical threat and react to it. Kill him, he orders, stepping back. Keep the girl alive as backup leverage. 6 operatives converge on Ezra at once, and for the first time in this entire second life, we get to see something the tavern fight and the assassin encounter only hinted at. What happens when Ezra Thorne stops holding back? His body still isn't what it was in his old life. That gap hasn't closed, not completely, not yet. But he's spent months now training relentlessly toward exactly this moment, and more than that, he's operating on something that goes beyond physical strength entirely. 6 years of tactical experience commanding actual warfare, applied now to 6 operatives who, however skilled, have never faced anything like what's about to hit them. The first operative to reach him doesn't even get a strike in. Ezra reads the attack a full half-second before it lands, sidesteps with an economy of movement that shouldn't be possible from someone his age, and redirects the man's own momentum into a strike that puts him down hard against the tower's stone base. The second and third come at him together, coordinated, clearly trained to work as pairs, a smart tactic against most opponents, and a completely useless one against someone who's spent 6 years reading and predicting exactly this kind of coordinated assault. Ezra moves between them, using the narrow space they're trying to trap him in against them instead, and within 3 seconds both are down, disarmed, groaning on the ground. Castor watches with growing, genuine alarm as his remaining 3 operatives fare no better. This isn't a talented young fighter overperforming his training. This is something that moves and thinks like a completely different category of threat entirely. The kind of controlled, devastating efficiency that Castor, in his entire career of dealing with dangerous people, has genuinely never witnessed from someone this young. When the last operative goes down, Ezra turns to face Castor directly, and for the first time since this confrontation began, something like genuine fear finally shows through Castor Vel's carefully composed exterior. "You're not human," Castor says, backing toward Ren, one hand reaching for something at his belt, a small, dark object that Ezra recognizes instantly with a fresh spike of alarm. A ritual focus, something Mordrek Vane's later operatives used for emergency escape rituals. Teleportation keyed to a specific safe location. "Let her go," Ezra says, closing the distance fast. "Now." "I don't think so." Castor's hand closes around Ren's bound wrist, dragging her closer as a shield, the ritual focus already glowing faintly in his other hand. "If I'm going to lose this fight, I'm at least taking some insurance with me. Everything that happens next unfolds in the space of maybe 2 seconds. But it's going to feel a lot longer if you're watching it play out. Because this is the moment the entire arc has been building toward." Castor begins the activation sequence for the ritual focus, the air around him starting to shimmer and distort with the telltale signature of teleportation magic, Ren still gripped tightly in his other hand. Ezra doesn't hesitate, doesn't calculate risk the way a careful person might in this exact moment. He simply moves, faster than his current body should be capable of, drawing on something underneath the physical limitations of this untrained 17-year-old frame, something that feels for just a moment like the raw, overwhelming power he remembers from 6 years as something considerably less than human. He closes the gap in a single motion, and instead of attacking Castor directly, which risks the activating ritual snapping shut around both Castor and Ren before Ezra can intervene, he does something considerably more precise. He strikes the ritual focus itself, a single, perfectly placed blow that shatters the object clean in Castor's grip before the teleportation sequence can complete. The magic collapses violently, throwing both Castor and Ren backward from the sudden release of unstable energy. Ren, freed from his grip in the chaos, tumbles clear. Castor is not so lucky. The failed ritual's backlash catches him directly, and he goes down hard, unconscious before he even hits the ground. For a moment, everything is silence except for Ren's ragged, terrified breathing as she scrambles backward against the tower's base, staring at her brother with wide, shocked eyes. Ezra crosses to her immediately, cutting through her bindings, checking her over with hands that are, for the first time in this entire confrontation, visibly shaking. "Are you hurt? Ren, look at me. Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she manages, voice cracking. "Ezra, what was that? What are you?" He doesn't have a simple answer for that. He's not sure he ever will, but he pulls his sister into a tight, desperate embrace, and for just a moment, allows himself to feel the full, overwhelming relief of a version of this story that didn't end the way it ended the first time. "I'll explain everything," he says quietly into her hair. "I promise. But right now, I just need you to be okay." Captain Sarah's garrison forces arrive minutes later, having tracked the confrontation's location, and find the Watchtower's base littered with unconscious Black Talon operatives and one very securely restrained Castor Vel, still unconscious from the ritual backlash. The interrogation that follows over the coming days peels back layers of the Black Talon's operations that even Sarah's garrison intelligence hadn't fully mapped. Supply chains, safe houses, and most importantly, confirmation of exactly the kind of dark, ritual-focused groundwork Ezra suspected they'd find. It's not the entire organization dismantled in a single stroke. Castor was one node in a much larger network, and Ezra knows better than anyone that the deeper threat, the eventual rise of someone like Mordrek Vane, is still out there somewhere, still building, still dangerous. But it's a genuine, meaningful blow, a foundation cracked years before it should have been. A future rewritten just a little further away from the one Ezra remembers. Back at the Thorn Estate, in the quiet days that follow, Ezra finally sits his family down and tells them as much of the truth as he thinks they can handle. Not the specifics of 6 years as an unwilling monster. Not yet. That's a conversation for when the wounds are less fresh on both sides. But enough. Enough that they understand he's not simply changed. Enough that they understand what's actually at stake in the months and years ahead, and why he needs them beside him rather than protected from all of it. His father listens without interrupting, something Ezra genuinely didn't expect. His mother's expression shifts through several stages of disbelief before settling into something quieter, more contemplative. Torin looks, if anything, even more fascinated than before. And Ren, who watched her brother dismantle 6 trained fighters and shatter a magical ritual with his bare hands, simply reaches over and takes his hand, steady and certain. "Whatever this is," she says, "whatever you're actually carrying around, you don't have to carry it alone anymore, not this time." That night, standing alone in the training yard where this entire second chance truly began, Ezra looks up at a sky that, 6 years ago in another version of this life, he genuinely believed he'd never see again as anything other than someone else's weapon. Castor Vel's branch of the Black Talon has been broken, but somewhere out there, in a timeline that's now shifted permanently away from everything Ezra remembers, a young man who will eventually become Mordrek Vane is still out there. Still unaware, still ordinary, still years away from whatever choices eventually turn him into the monster who ended 3 kingdoms. Ezra doesn't know exactly where to find him yet, doesn't know exactly how much time he has before that transformation begins in earnest, or what exactly triggers it in this reshaped version of events. But he knows this. He's not the same person who lived through it helplessly the first time. He has a family who knows the truth now, standing beside him instead of behind him. He has an ally in Captain Sarah Voss, whose garrison connections reach further than Ezra could manage alone. And somewhere out there, still undefeated in 4 years of tournament fighting except for one embarrassing loss to a mysterious noble boy who never took his hands out of his pockets, Freya Voss has started asking her own questions about exactly who Ezra Thorn really is. That's a story for next time. For now, our boy finally allows himself something he hasn't felt in what might genuinely be measured in years rather than months. The quiet, settled feeling of a person who knows exactly what he's fighting for, and finally has the people around him to help him win it. The Hollow Reaper is gone. What's left standing in his place is something considerably harder to define, and considerably more dangerous to anyone foolish enough to threaten what he's protecting.